In a universe where space travel is the norm and humanity is spread across the stars, it's easy for most people to forget Terra. Unless you're a clanner, then thoughts of it fill the majority of your day. For the rest of us, being born, growing up, living a life and dying without ever visiting or really even hearing much about Terra, it may as well not exist. As I was researching for the ComGuard video, I was hit with the urge to find out what the Terran system looked like in the BattleTech universe. Of course, this is going to change over the time periods depending upon the available sources, so let's get into it. The Terran system has 9 planets, even though for a short period of time in the 21st century it was falsely claimed that there were only 8. With those planets are hundreds of smaller objects in the form of asteroids, dwarf planets, and comets. If it weren't for the fact that Terra was the birthplace and cradle for humanity, it would only be a nominally notable solar system. At the center is a G-type main sequence star, often referred to as a yellow dwarf, or even more colloquially as the Sun by locals. For most of human history, the Sun played an important role in the lives of the people born within the Terran system. In some early cultures, it was used to establish measurements of time, while in others it took on a role of a deity which could directly impact the lives of people. As people started to make scientific advances, they noticed that they weren't alone in their relationship with the closest star. There were actually many objects rotating along with the planet they called Earth. Of the 9 planets, the most important to humanity's current existence in the 30th, 31st, and 32nd centuries are the closest worlds to the Sun. These 4 terrestrial planets and their moons offered opportunities for people to become multiplanetary species and eventually enabled the spread across the stars. The most important of these terrestrial or rocky worlds is Terra. At 9.12 days from the jump point, 1 satellite, which we'll get to later, and living conditions perfectly suited for humans to survive, it's no wonder that this planet has been a treasure worth fighting for thousands of years. Following the Ameris coup and collapse of the Star League, Terra was shockingly not turned into molten slag during the Succession Wars. In fact, it became a central hub for trade and information. Comstar, and later the Word of Blake, controlled the planet's government through an intermediary called the Branch of Terran Affairs. While not a democracy in any sense of the word, the BOTA was not totalitarian either, so people generally had the freedom to live, move, and participate in commerce, which helped the planet recover from the collapse of the Star League. The BOTA also continued efforts started by previous governments to clean up thousands of years of pollution and scars from wars and industrial production in an effort to save and preserve the birthplace of humanity. Much of the industry built up on the planet was located underground to preserve the intrinsic beauty of the planet, due to both the need for preserving what is left and the fact that many of the best mining locations on the planet were completely tapped out. Terrans are prolific recyclers who recover as much as possible from refuse using fusion-powered plasma elemental separators. Those sound really cool. I want to know how they work. Beyond the confines of Terra, the solar system is one of the most traveled of the inner sphere. Millions of people travel between the various stations, terraformed planets, moons, and habitats scattered throughout the system. Both Mercury and Mars ship large quantities of raw materials to Terra to feed the factories located there. The supply chains set up at the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century pale in comparison to the complexity of this system-wide network. Not all 7 continents of Terra have substantial populations. The major cities tend to be located in the more temperate zones. These cities all have large spaceports which allow off-planet travel and travel between the cities. During the Comstar days, and even later under the control of the Word of Blake, Terra was considered one of the most heavily defended planets of the inner sphere. This continued through the Dark Age and was ultimately demonstrated with the invasion by Clan Wolf and Jade Falcon in 3151. It took the combined might of 2 clanned Tumans to ultimately crack its defenses. As much fun as Terra is, it's really not the only place in the Terran system where people can be found. Luna, Earth's only moon, is also home to roughly 3 million inhabitants. According to records, the first permanent settlement on the surface of Luna was way back in the Dark Age of 2016, in hopes that it could be a center for industry and military defense of Terra. Though it didn't really pan out for either of those goals, the settlement did grow as a tourist attraction. Resorts and pleasure destinations were littered across the surface, servicing families, diplomats, thrill seekers, and adults seeking low-gravity entertainment. In the 2300s, the Terran hegemony sought to use Luna as a base of operations for the ever-expanding bureaucracy in an attempt to physically separate workers from corruptive influences on Terra. A significant amount of money was put into building up the infrastructure of Luna to support this legion of paper pushers. While it may have been a noble idea, it didn't really pan out as few people wanted to be stationed there for the long term. Most of the permanent residents on Luna work for the tourist industry within the major cities of Luna City and Armstrong City. There are a few jobs in logistics and the aerospace industry, but the number is paltry in comparison to folding towels and delivering drinks to people laying out by the pool under the view of an Earthrise. Taking a little longer trip away from the bounds of Earth, our next destination is Mars. The fascination with the red planet dates back long before humans were even capable of spaceflight. While probes were sent during the 20th century to gather data and dash hopes of finding little green aliens, it wasn't until 2017 when the first humans would step upon the surface of Mars. Of course, with a surface temperature far too cold for humans and an incredibly thin atmosphere composed mostly of carbon dioxide, it would be a long time before a significant number of people could call Mars home. Terraforming projects were discussed and a variety of options were implemented. Within a century, the stacks pumping out carbon dioxide for the imported microbes and plants to consume thickened the atmosphere, which retained more sunlight and pushed up global temperatures. The water trapped as ice under the Martian surface melted and filled in the low-lying areas with oceans as they had been millions of years in the past. Because of the efforts on Mars and Venus were the nearest to Terra, few other terraforming projects were ever as extensive or as successful. Reaching an equatorial temperature of 12 degrees centigrade, and with a thin but still breathable air, Mars had been terraformed into a viable second world in the system for humanity. Unfortunately, there were some things that couldn't be changed to meet the desires of those who moved to Mars. The gravity, being only a little bit more than 1/3 of the strength of Terra, was difficult to adapt to and caused some health problems for long-term residents. There wasn't much that could be done to alleviate it. Over time, the terraforming did have a positive impact, though it never quite met the promises of those who claimed that the planet could be turned into a lush Garden of Eden. The primary settlers on Mars were miners working for the various industrial operations set up to extract raw materials and the extremely wealthy Terrans who sought an escape far from the confines of Earth and even Luna. Sprawling estates were constructed far from the lenses of the paparazzi or prying private detectives. Historical documents suggest that at the peak of the Star League's golden age, almost 70 million people called Mars home. With the collapse of the Star League and the rise of Stefan Amaris, many people who lived on Mars saw the writing on the wall and either left the system entirely or moved back to Terra. The terraforming efforts stopped as funding was drained away for the war effort. In the aftermath and stewardship under Comstar, the number of permanent residents dropped to only a few million. Without a growing population or any real public support, the terraforming continued to languish, and Mars began to show signs of returning to its previously chilly state. The oceans began to recede and the ice caps grew. The temperature slowly began to drop, which eventually put pressure on the Martian industries to make a stink about it to Comstar officials. Still, not much was done about it. Only under the stewardship of the Word of Blake did Mars start to receive more attention. Terraforming options picked for their low cost were implemented, including seeding the planet with icy comets and asteroids and growing large quantities of oxygen-producing microbes and plants to bulk up the atmosphere. The Phobos Skyhook project was used to slow the descent of these mountains of ice to the Martian surface so that the impact would not wipe out half the planet. Instead, the modest city-sized impact events were popular public spectacle. These modest investments brought rave reviews and strong loyalty to the Word of Blake from the planet's miners and other residents. The Blakeists identified the planet as useful for a semi-private place for operations, and they used it for bureaucratic processes and even reopened the ancient SLDF War College to produce local loyal soldiers from stocks of recruits. In 3078, Mars became center stage for some of the last fighting against the Word of Blake in the Terran system. Devlin Stone assigned his close confidant, General Andrew Redburn, to the task of landing on Mars and taking out the Word of Blake headquarters in Koryo. In order to avoid issues that might arise from participation in military operations on Terra, the clans who participated in Stone's coalition were directed toward non-Terran targets. So when the dropships began to fall toward the Martian surface, clan troops would be included along with the 7th Donegal Guards. The target was a domed structure with several large airlocks for vehicles. In an attempt to protect the dome from a breach, the coalition landed just outside and assaulted 3 of the 6 airlocks. Clan Wolf in Exile and the Nova Cats took one, the 7th Donegal and the Hell's Horses another, and Stone's Liberators with the 3rd. The landing was contested, and every inch beyond the LZ was met with ferocious resistance from the Blakeist defenders. Once inside the dome, the fighting was street by street and building by building. Leave it to the word of Blake, ROM, to realize our unwillingness to use collateral damage, and use that to their advantage. Instead of facing us like soldiers, they melted into the population and began a guerrilla war against us. We've had bombings, sniper attacks, kidnappings, and other ambushes plague us since we arrived. It's time to end this, but we cannot just level the residential areas. We have to ferret them out, building by building, room by room. Journal entry for General Andrew Redburn, 23rd November, 3078. He continues in another entry. Unfortunately, the early reports coming in already indicate that the clans are less restrained in dealing with insurgents than they are under direct supervision. They've already shattered 2 domes to eliminate resistance. Sure, that worked, but it also killed most of the inhabitants. I've made it crystal clear that this is unacceptable, but we'll see if their restraint lasts more than a few days. Journal entry General Andrew Redburn, 28th November, 3078. So this is where we come to a little conflict in our historical record. I previously stated that the terraforming efforts had rendered Mars's atmosphere thin but breathable. Nothing that I've seen talks about the quality of the atmosphere degrading to the point where it wasn't. But apparently by 3078, according to the Total Chaos sourcebook, people on Mars were living within these domed cities by necessity, and breaching them would result in a catastrophic loss of breathable atmosphere. Perhaps this is something that could be brought up someday with a lore expert at Catalyst to know for sure, but we all just know that at some point the oxygen was breathable, according to the first book, and now not, according to the Total Chaos sourcebook. So where that point is up for debate. I brought it up in a recent AMA on Catalyst's YouTube channel, and the response didn't quite clarify things very much. It's easily explained with some date at which the air turned bad, but from the description in Redburn's journal, it's pretty clear-cut that if those domed cities are breached, the people inside die. On December 16th, the remaining Word of Blake forces surrendered to General Redburn, and the Mars campaign was complete. Jumping forward to the Ill Clan era, we know that Clan Wolf let Mars be conquered by the Jade Falcons in a deliberate attempt to save time and to bleed the Falcons a bit before they even got to Terra. Malvina Hazen briefly considered bypassing Mars entirely, but she didn't want any remaining Republic aerospace forces still operating to use it as a way to hit Falcon ships that were continually streaming in to that zenith jump point. The Falcons landed on the slopes of Olympus Mons on T+21, and even though the Republic defenders put up a valiant effort, the ferocious Falcon mechs took every opportunity in that low gravity to sail through the air over the front lines and routing the defenders. On Malvina Hazen's orders, the War College was spared damage, though the students and the faculty fought hard to defend it anyway. Ultimately, the students and teachers met the same sad fate that most that stood up to the Mongol doctrine faced. Hazen wanted the school for future Jade Falcons. She had no need for the existing students or staff. When the first powerful telescopes were aimed at Venus, there was hope that it would be a lush, tropical world where plants and animals were plentiful. On paper, the planet looked like it would be the best opportunity for a second hospitable world in the solar system along with Terra. Those hopes were dashed when it turned out that the dense clouds which cover the planet were concealing a searing hellscape. The mean surface temperature was a balmy 464 degrees Celsius, which, for us Americans, is twice the temperature at which you'd want to cook your chicken tenders in the oven. Plan accordingly. The atmosphere was thick and composed almost entirely of carbon dioxide. This blanket locked in the solar heat and contributed to the unbelievably hostile environment. Besides the near-Earth-like gravity, there was little about Venus which looked good for human habitation. This, of course, didn't stop the Terran Alliance from tackling the challenge. In what was deemed Project Aphrodite in the 2100s, the planet was bombarded with genetically engineered algae that began to consume the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Hydrogen was then added to the atmosphere using redirected comets and through hydrocarbon shipments from Titan. Mines on Mercury provided additional chemical and mineral elements like calcium, which was used by the algae in the process of sequestration of carbon dioxide into limestone rock. Additionally, through a process that used quote-unquote excess temperature, the speed of Venus's rotation was accelerated until it had a 48-hour day instead of a 224.7-day-long day. At the end of the century of terraforming, Venus was declared habitable for human and animal life. Pretty impressive. It stands as one of humankind's greatest technological accomplishments even in the 32nd century. In the next few centuries, Venus became a popular destination for colonists leaving Terra for new opportunities. The soil ended up being nitrogen-rich from the terraforming process, and the planet became a breadbasket for the system. Just like on Mars, it even got its own war college. Unfortunately, the successful terraforming over such a short amount of time resulted in unforeseen consequences. As it turns out, controlling the climate of a planet isn't so easy to do, as so many had hoped. The atmosphere required continual reprocessing in massive industrial complexes lest it start to thicken again from the evaporation of water and push the temperature up through the greenhouse process. During his short tenure in charge, Stefan Amaris caused significant damage when he tried to turn a massive sunshade into a focused beam weapon, which only resulted in the shade falling apart and crashing to the ground, killing thousands. Much like with Mars, Comstar really wasn't interested in spending the time or money required to keep up maintenance with Terra's closest neighbors. Venus's atmospheric processors required constant maintenance, and they were getting quite old and operating well past their expected lifespan. Gradually, the planet's greenhouse effect took hold, increasing the temperature on the planet. By the 30th and 31st centuries, it had accelerated to the point of no return without essentially starting over with the terraforming process. Settlers left, and a few at first and then in droves. By the year 3000, only a few thousand settlers remained on the planet, and they could only survive in hardened structures that protected them from the brutal temperatures outside. By the time Clan Wolf entered the Terran system, Venus wasn't even on the radar. It was less hospitable to life than it had been before the original terraforming. If Venus is ever to see life on its surface again, it will require a Herculean technical effort that I suspect is beyond even the Ill Clan's capabilities. Our next stop in the Terran system is Titan, the largest moon orbiting the ringed planet of Saturn. While it was known by the late 20th and early 21st century astronomers, it wouldn't be until the advent of fusion-powered spacecraft that humans explored the large moon. Once they did exist, Titan was on the short list of stops during the Great Journeys missions of the late 2020s and early 2030s. The moon was very hostile towards life as we know it, but at the time of the first exploration, researchers were hoping to find examples of extremophile life that could be formed in the extremely low-temperature hydrocarbon lakes and streams on Titan's surface. Tidally locked with Saturn and rocking a negative 179.5 degrees centigrade average temperature, the moon was not considered a candidate for terraforming. However, the nitrogen-rich atmosphere and hydrocarbon lakes were a valuable resource for industry in the terraforming of Mars and Venus. The first permanent bases of operations on Titan were operational in 2042. The well-insulated structure could keep up to 100 scientists safe and able to run experiments on the moon's surface. Mining operations for those previously mentioned terraforming projects started quickly, producing the vast amount of raw materials for Mars and Venus that brought in workers and infrastructure around the process that grew accordingly. When those terraforming projects came to an end, the corporations which owned all of that infrastructure pivoted to building large space vessels. This included jump ships. Due to Titan's location within Saturn's gravity well and Saturn's distance away from the Sun's jump points, the Titan shipyards ended up being a pretty good place to build a jump ship. Large-scale space stations and shipyards were expanded over time, and soon they became massive. Producing jump ships at an efficient rate and being able to sell them at a competitive price drove down the cost of space exploration and made the Titan shipyards a powerhouse industry in the Terran system. The Titan shipyards survived the Amaris coup and Civil War largely due to the management shifting loyalty to Kerensky's SLDF forces upon their arrival in system. Under Comstar, the shipyards were largely mothballed as ship production was deliberately limited. Even when the supply of jump ships across the inner sphere fell to disastrously low levels, Titan's shipyards were mostly quiet. It wasn't until the threat of the world of Blake began to materialize did Comstar attempt to get the gears of production running again. It was too late, however, and the shipyards would end up in the hands of the Blakists. When Alaric's Clan Wolf arrived in the Terran system, the Titan shipyards were a key location that had to be addressed in order to prevent the Republic of the Sphere aerospace units from resupplying, repairing, and harassing Clan Wolf assets. Star Admiral Hake Sukhanov ordered Task Force Hyperion to secure the shipyards quickly. The Republic forces defending the shipyards were substantial. This included assault dropships, space stations armed with banks of turrets and missile batteries, as well as several wings of aerospace fighters. What resulted was the largest aerospace battle since Devlin Stone's assault on the system in 3078. The Republic of the Sphere defenses around Titan had been reinforced far beyond the expectations of Clan Wolf, and that cost many clan warriors their lives. Eventually, the ROS forces were whittled down under the pressure of the Wolves, and the Titan shipyards were taken. Our next to last stop on our tour around the Terran system is Mercury. As the planet closest to the system star, Mercury ended up tidally locked. That means it always has the same side of its surface facing the star while the other is perpetually facing away. This makes for a very different surface condition depending on which side of the planet you're standing on. While there isn't much to get into concerning history, as there was no serious attempt for terraforming or setting up extensive settlements, we do know that there were mining facilities set up during the Star League, as minerals for Mercury were used in the terraforming of Mars and Venus. Finally, we need to talk about the asteroid belt and the Kuiper objects. The Terran system's main asteroid belt is located between Mars and Jupiter. We know now that Jupiter's gravity prevented those objects from coalescing into a planet. The millions of objects of varying sizes floating around presented a unique opportunity to get to elements that were rare on Earth. This was particularly important before interstellar travel was developed. As the 21st century came to a close, huge amounts of minerals were being pulled from objects with both manned and unmanned mining operations. The isolation of space stations, mining operations, and shipyards out in the distant asteroids created a bit of a Wild West environment where people could escape from the minders of government while still making a decent living. The Ameris coup and Civil War was destructive to several of the larger asteroid colonies, and it left a lasting impression. Even with the rise of Comstar, the people out there really didn't want anything to do with the outside universe. The Belters, as they were known, became bystanders through the Comstar years and then the Word of Blake administration of the system. As time passed, hundreds of millions of people settled into floating colonies throughout both the asteroid belt and elsewhere in the outer solar system. The habitats they constructed were sometimes free-floating, while others were dug into asteroids or dwarf planets. The structures vary in form, but the one constant is a plentiful supply of minerals, water, and from many accounts the Belters lived pretty comfortable lives away from the politics and war that continually washes over the planets of the inner sphere. I hope you enjoyed our little journey through the Terran system. I think perhaps our view of the big things going on across the inner sphere and beyond make us a little less likely to appreciate the little nuances that make BattleTech such a rich and interesting place. The fact that those who have helped flesh out the universe over the years cared enough to be able to research and make sure that things made sense is a major reason why we're all still BattleTech fans today. It'll also drive the creation of new fans because there's almost a limitless amount of content over these last 40 years of BattleTech. Doing this video really reminded me that I'm really looking forward to this next year, and hope you are too. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button with your free action. Big thank you to the Ko-Fi supporters and channel members who are going above and beyond to make sure I can keep making these videos. I appreciate it so much that words really can't adequately describe it. Take care, and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.